The views expressed on the following broadcast do not necessarily reflect the opinions of KHLT Recovery Broadcasting or its affiliates. The dialogue on this show should not be considered as medical, psychiatric, or professional advice and is delivered only as personal opinions from the host, co-host, and guest. KHLT Recovery Broadcasting is not affiliated with any particular 12-step fellowship.
If you've heard what he's about to say for the 1,300th time,
I want this network to be different. I don't want it to be like all the other talk radio networks.
You're such a great resource, Monty, to people who are struggling and suffering and people in recovery.
Monty, first let me say it's a pleasure to be a part of your show. We really believe in what you're doing.
you've heard 100 times what Monty has said. You've learned to turn down the volume when Monty talks.
What are you going to find when you go to Take 12 Recovery Radio?
You are going to have a spiritual experience.
And now, here's your host, the Monty'man.
Well, greetings, family, and welcome to another episode of the Take 12 Recovery Radio Show. This episode will be featuring an AA circuit speaker who has been, he's just a very interesting guy. If you're an AA history buff, you're going to enjoy this. If you're interested in learning a little bit about the dabbling of Bill W. when it came to mind-altering substances other than alcohol, you'll be interested in this. There may be some things in here that you think are a little odd. You may agree or disagree, but one thing you cannot say about JS is that he's not very interesting. Now, Jay is from Sedona, Arizona, not surprisingly enough. And the topic of his share at the Ashore, Washington Convention 2023 is Bill W. and the Frontiers of Consciousness. Here's JS.
My name is Jay, and I'm an alcoholic. And God is doing for me today what I couldn't do for myself, because it's like 10 o'clock in the morning in Ocean Shores, Washington, and I haven't had anything to drink yet today. Whoa! And you can tell I'm a morning drinker, right? I mean, who else would be this enthusiastic? My first wife used to say, he wakes up like this. Anyway, I bring you greetings from Sedona, Arizona, where we live in the fourth dimension, and we visit the fifth, and we entertain those that are stuck in the third. So when it comes to the frontier of consciousness, it's something that I'm well versed in, and the area in which I live is very conducive to this transition between dimensions. First of all, I'd like to thank the Creator that made this amazing, stunning area, and to the indigenous people to which it was given, who took care of it, and now we get to come and play. So I want to get that out of the way, and then to tell you that I am the most fortunate male form that you've ever met. I came to you on the second day of May in 1979, and although I found it necessary on a lot of occasions, I haven't taken the front drink, I haven't sniffed any glue, or done any of those other things that I found to be so consoling. So my experience is that Alcoholics Anonymous works amazingly. Now, I was given this personality to inflict on others. And as a small child, at 8 years old, I was given a copy of the Iliad by Homer, an illustrated thing for children. And I fell in love with history. And so when I came into Alcoholics Anonymous, and I'm vibrating at the Birch Street Club thinking what to do before I go to court, there were some, there was a little bookcase, and it had Not God and Dr. Bob and the Good Old Timers and the Big Book and the 12 and 12 and As Bill Sees It. And so I bought them I bought the books I didn't have, and I just got enchanted. And I know that none of you are like this, that in the beginning my study of history had to do with finding out what the Oxford group did correctly and what we weren't doing in Alcoholics Anonymous. So I could weaponize the book, work the steps better than anyone else, and, you know, carry my sponsees into nirvana. And I had a wonderful time. I spent 10 years really getting close to a lot of the people in the what we now call initiatives of change. In those days, it was called moral rearmament, and I have real experience about those people. You know, it's interesting that people take a look at the Oxford group literature and the four absolutes, and you know, then they talk about these aggressive evangelists, and you know, that's kind of like reading the big book in the 12 and 12 if you've never been to an AA meeting and saying that you can comment on the people and what Alcoholics Anonymous is. And they're some of the most dynamic and wonderful and spiritually developed people I've ever met. And we're involved in all kinds of great things, and I've had the great fortune to go all over the planet and be involved with folks like that. So it's not that I just sit around and look at stuff. I get engaged, just like I did with alcohol. So, why do you say you're the most fortunate guy in the world? Well, if you're of a historical bent, and when I got sober, there were tens of thousands of people that had met Bill Wilson. There were, you know, thousands that had met Dr. Bob. Who was I to comment on that? But now it's, you know, a few decades later, and one of the things that happened is that after I came out of my sober man phase, which was from about, I'd say about 1980 to 1995, you know, I had my cape on, you know, armed with steps, concepts, and traditions. You have an alcoholic with a drinking problem, give them to me. I'll teach them how to properly work the steps. And, you know, and it was wonderful. Best work I've done in my whole sobriety. But like all enthusiasms, it has a shelf life. And reality, as Bill said, sometimes, you know, black and white is great, but, you know, at some point we got to start mixing a little blue. And so to the point of, what was that reading? Well, that reading was from a book that was originally published as The AA Way of Life. Bill never would have let him call it As Bill Sees It. Right? And what he did, when you read the foreword to the book, he says, I've taken these things and I've changed them a little bit because of the change of language, and so that they're more understandable to the current audience. So he rewrote the third step prayer. He changed it from victory, which is the kind of language that you use when you're newly sober, to transcendence, which is fluid, which has ups and downs and ins and outs. And so when we, you know, and this weekend we are going to get to hear the most wonderful presenters share all kinds of wonderful information to inform us and make it so that we're able to be more effective in our working with others and more effective in our relationship with a power greater than ourselves. And I'm allergic to fundamentalism, having been one, just like our wonderful speaker last night. And that was such a great participation. Thank you. But you know, you get that righteousness going. And you find out that, so every person here, one of my most fervent prayers for you is that you will go to Stepping Stone's website and you will get on the archive. Okay. Best laid plans, thank you very much. We were going to do a PowerPoint for the folks in the back, but we're gonna swap it up then. Thank you so much. The Stepping Stones website, and there's an archive there. There's a digital archive, and what we've been able to do the past 7 years is we've been able to digitize every letter that Bill and Lois ever got and sent back and forth to other people, so that you don't need people like me to interpret things to you. We're in a new phase of information in the fellowships. We no longer have to worry about or look at what it is that how people are spinning things. And it's exciting. So you can actually go on there, and if you're a biker, you can go Bill and Motorcycles, and there it is. And you can read a letter that this guy sent to Lois because Nell Wing, Bill's secretary, and this is after he died, wouldn't send the picture of Lois on the Harley because they didn't want it to be involved with outside issues and Alcoholics Anonymous and all this stuff. And Lois sent it, you know. But he said, you know, this is going to really help us and work on the prisons and stuff. So you can do that, whatever your enthusiasm is. So I really recommend that you do this. But what I've been able to do for the past 2.5 years is to be the beta tester for the digital archive. So I've had more access to Bill Wilson than just about anybody, you know, as far as probably the Nell Wing who typed it all. And it's humbling. And it's a lot of fun. Because I feel like I know the Bill Wilson of the coffee shop, not the Bill Wilson that we tried to make him. He never wanted to be a demigod. He never wanted to be deified. He knew who he was. He was just another drunk trying to get along. And he had challenges in his life just like you have challenges in yours. And so who is this guy? So I'm going to talk to you about the Bill Wilson outside of Alcoholics Anonymous. A man who I believe is one of the most adventurous intellectuals of the middle of last century. And he ran with some of the most incredible people, and I'm going to introduce you to a few of them, but that he was taking places that are just fabulous and that inspire me in my life. So, a couple of things. When you run across somebody that calls them a historian, ask them what their prejudice is, because we all got our point of view. And if they pretend they don't have one, so number one, I'm allergic to fundamentalism. I'm a guy who just, I've never put things into boxes. And our movement is very young. This noble experiment that we call Alcoholics Anonymous is very, very young. And I've been fortunate, as a number of the people here, to be active and involved for over half of the existence of Alcoholics Anonymous. So we need to be aware of where we are and how we're shaping the message and all that stuff. So the thing about Bill is that he knew from the gate that all spiritual movements calcify. And he tried his best to make it so that AA wouldn't be stuck. And, you know, within 5 years, he realized that there was no way that he could make any of the changes that he wanted to because the movement would throw him out. Because we want hierarchy. And Bill Wilson was allergic to hierarchies. Has anybody ever heard about Bill taking instruction from Fulton Sheen to become a Roman Catholic, and then he didn't become a Catholic because of his love of the fellowship, and he denied himself this? Has anybody ever heard that? Anyway, one of the fun things is that's an absolute canard. He did go and see Sheen all the time. Lois said they were debating sessions. And when Bill was writing about the next phase of his life in 1958, he said the hierarchical churches wanted to keep power. And he was trying to make sure that Alcoholics Anonymous, through the traditions, didn't get stuck in that. And anyway, so for me, the way that I kind of think about Wilson's life is that there's two parts of it. The first part is he's a third dimension guy. He is absolutely stuck in materialism. Science is his God. This is the way things are. If you can't, as our friend Eckhart Tolle says, if you can't dice it, kill it, dice it up, and pull it apart, it doesn't exist. and Bill was part of the first generation that was educated, that was liberated from the yoke of religion. And so they were, things were boundless, they were limitless, and that science was going to take care of everything. But science without spirit. So he's all involved in all this stuff. He gets this drink problem, he ends up in this jitter joint, the Charles B. Towns Hospital for Drug Addicts, neurasthenics, and alcoholics. And he ends up in this joint 3 different times. And his buddy Ebby comes by to visit him, and they have this talk, and Bill comes up against his prejudice in a way that he never had. He knew that he was dying. And it was either that he was going to find this power and ask it for help, or he was going to be gone. So Ebby leaves, and Bill says, I was as depressed as I've ever been. And he cried out, if there be a God, will he show himself? And he has this experience. Now, this experience that he had is described in William James's Varieties of Religious Experience as the sudden type. And then the second type is called the volitional experience. Wilson misquotes it in the Spiritual Experience Appendix in the book. Volition is very different than education. Volition is the focus of the will. You have to actually do something. Education can be passive. I'll just sit around and I'll go to meetings until it comes across. And so anyway, so there are these two families that actually, being in the Northwest, we should the thing about the two families, the sudden and the volitional experience, spiritual experience, actually comes from Professor Edwin Starbuck. So we can be awake for that. And but anyway, in a book that he wrote called The Psychology of Religion, which William James references over 50 times in Varieties. So there's this sudden experience that he has. Wilson always said that he was very upset the way that religious people, professional religious people, used folks that have had those types of experience, because it's as if it's something special and different. And Wilson always said there is no difference between the two. How do we know? By the fruits. By the fruits. And so this sudden experience, this unitive experience, This experience that many of us had when we had our first drink. Suddenly, the world is a place that I can be in. And when one has one of these types of experiences, suddenly, the world becomes an entirely different place. But yet, it doesn't change with the person that has the volitional experience. There's a great talk that Bill gave in 1969 in Detroit. And at the end, he's talking about it. He says, there is no difference between the two. He said, you go to any meeting, and you sit there, and there's a guy, and he gets up, and his wife's bringing him a cake, and they're both crying. And he talks about, my family isn't terrorized anymore. My employer respects me. I'm part of my AA community. I haven't had anything to drink. Bill says that. Then the guy says, well, but Bill, in his experience, I don't got the spiritual angle. That is the spiritual angle. What we have in Alcoholics Anonymous is a methodology. Steps. We have a methodology that allows people to have an ongoing volitional spiritual experience. And it's transmittable and it's transferable, which makes it, actually, in my humble opinion, superior to the sudden flash. So, if you're looking for your experience, you've had it. You've had it. And so welcome to the fourth dimension. So Wilson has this, and he knew that it was real. Now I know that if there's a group of 800 people here, that there's at least 80 of us that have had one of these spiritual experiences of that variety. And they happen all the time. It's just a matter of whether you're in a community whose consciousness supports it or not. But so he has this experience, and he was changed at a cellular level. I mean, when Lois came in, she looked at him and she went, he's different. She also said, I knew that he would never drink again. He asked Silkworth if he was mad. Silkworth told him, no, you're not. You're not mad. I've read about these in books. He'd read varieties. He says, I've read about this in books, and whatever it is, you hold on to it because it's a heck of a lot better than what you had just a few minutes ago. Let's be really clear about that. Who cares if you're crazy? So he has this unitive experience, and the rest of his life, I believe what he was trying to do was tell people that were stuck in the third dimension as he had been, that no longer did they have to just be in three, that they could transit into 4, 5, 6, 7. The hits just keep on coming, as we like to say. So he has this change of consciousness. He gets plucked up and put down, and he tries to find out about it, as we all do. But the main thing, of course, was that his compulsion to drink was removed. Amazing. And so they start out. By 1943, Wilson is in a real jam emotionally because he realizes that he can no longer he cannot have what he called the friendships that AAs have. He could never be an AA member. People either wanted to put him up top or they wanted to put him below. And he went and was involved with a fabulous Jungian therapist in 1943 by the name of Whelan, Francis Whelan, and And so Bill is not able to have the relationships that we can have. So where's he going to get it? He has to get it outside of the fellowship, because outside of the fellowship, he's not looked at like, oh, here's the guy that saved our lives, you know? And then we start putting his picture up every place. And he's you know, a really tall guy. One of the things that's interesting, this is an opinion, okay? Maybe a really good one should be yours, but you know. But if you, there's a lot of Bill's contemporaries felt that his depression was behavior-based. And if you take a look at Wilson's body type, he's marfanoid. Marfan's is a horrible illness, and it's mostly seen in women on the covers of magazines. They aren't all heroin addicts. They actually have a physical condition that gives that body type. And there is an organic depression that comes with that. Another thing, they always talked about how he didn't like to be standing at a podium. If he could, he would sit. And if he couldn't sit, he'd sit on the floor. Or if he could, he'd sit on the floor. And if he could, he'd actually lay down and talk from with being propped up on his elbows. And that's a sign of a thing called POTS, P-O-T-S, that has to do with one's ability for the blood to circulate properly and the like. So this is another organic depression thing. Anyway, he got involved with the Jungian, this Jungian therapist, and there's a wonderful vignette about Bill and the Countess Margarita von Lutenthal, who had come to the United States to get away from the Second World War, and when she returned to Geneva because she was a Jungian and did a lot of analytical work. She returned to Geneva just after the war, and when she went, Wilson sent with her, because they had the same therapist, sent a copy of the Big Book and some pamphlets to Jung. And so Margarita comes and she sees the doctor, and the doctor says, oh, you know, God, it's great to see you, yada, yada, yada. And up until this point, Carl Jung had always been very, very hesitant about groups and spiritual experiences, because he felt that when an individual had a spiritual experience and they came into a group, or the experience came within a group, like a tent revival or an Oxford group house party, that what would happen is that they would put they would put their emotional information about being a member and not doing the personal spiritual work. And so he was not a fan of groups at all, until von Lutenthal comes and brings him a copy of the book Alcoholics Anonymous and explains to him what's been going on in the United States. And he says, oh, come back tomorrow. And so she comes back the next day, and he perused the book, and he gave her some really direct instructions about how this group work could feed and help groups of people change, especially because the need was so great after the Second World War. So here it is. We're actually helping Jung's mind open to a different methodology. Cool stuff. Now, I find this interesting. I don't know about you guys, you know. Sidebar. My entire life is a sidebar. Better than a sidecar, but who wants to drink yolk in your rum? You know, it's just awful. Or your gin. Anyway, on Tuesday, I will be at Stepping Stones, and I will be in the spook room where Bill and Lois were, and their friends did a lot of psychic investigation. And in there is a book. It's Man's Search for a Soul by Carl Jung, that signed a bill for Marguerite von Muttenkow. I just love that stuff. So, anyway. So, he's had this experience. He's looking for some way to integrate himself and to be able to have these experiences. And he gets involved. There's a wonderful book that I'd like to recommend that you get if you're into history type stuff. It's called God, the Bestseller by Stephen Prothero. And it just came out 4 months ago. He's a little off on his AA history stuff, but it's a biography of Eugene Exman, who was one of the fascinating characters in Wilson's life. And Exman is the guy who told Hank Parkhurst and Bill, no, you shouldn't sell this book, Alcoholics Anonymous, to Harper Brothers. And they got offered an advance on it and everything, and the Rockefeller people are saying, oh, you got to take it, you got to take it. And Exman said, don't. He said, you publish your own book, keep the rights. That's the reason that we're all here today. You know, because, yeah. Exman also leaned on these people. He was the religion editor at Harper and Brothers. And he leaned on these people to make sure that they charged Hank and Bill what it was that their biggest customer, Harper and Brothers, was being charged. So, I mean, he was, but Exman had one of these spiritual experiences. He had one of these vital, sudden things when he was young. And so when he read Bill's story, he identified with it, and the two of them became really, really good friends for their life. And Exman did all kinds of wonderful things. He brought all kinds of different, he used a publishing platform that had been basically publishing sermons of famous preachers and making them available nationwide to a way of sharing different roads to spirituality. For example, he brought Garma Shuxing Shang, who was the first teacher of Zen Buddhism in the United States. He wrote a book on Zen Buddhism and brought him to the U.S. and introduced him to his friends and things like this. He went to the Birmingham jail when Martin Luther King was there. And he said, Dr. King, your story needs to get out. I will publish it. This guy was amazing. So, Exman is involved with a philosopher by the name of Gerald Hurd, H-E-A-R-D. And Hurd was one of the real remarkable philosophers of the last century. And Hurd's basic thing was, to put it into a nutshell, put Gerald Hurd into a nutshell. Arrogance, didn't it? Yes, I am. But Professor Hurd, his idea is that Darwin was only half right. The evolution thing was absolutely, yeah, good stuff, because Hurd was an anthropologist, but he did not take into account the mental and the spiritual evolution of the species. And that what we're doing is that we're in the midst of this next shift out of self-consciousness. You know how in the book it keeps talking about what's the problem itself, to what I like to refer to and what many of his contemporaries referred to as a cosmic consciousness. An acceptance that every decision that I make has something to do with the collective. That it's not just about me, it's not about myself, it's about all of us. And that we are in the midst of this. And I like to say that every time you meditate, every time that you seek the unity of experience in your own experience, you are doing what those first amphibians were doing when they were climbing out of the primordial ooze. that we are in the midst of a shift. He called it, they called it the next level of consciousness. Later on, it was called the Age of Aquarius. And so Herd and a man by the name of Aldous Huxley immigrated to the United States. Herd was going to be the anthropology chair at anthropology chair at Duke University, and he took a look around. He says, "No, that's not what I want to do." So he took all of his money, and he moved to Trabuco Canyon, just above Laguna Beach, and he established a center called the Trabuco Center for Prayer, the Study of Prayer and Meditation. And their idea was that they were going to take all the different types of ways that people move towards God and put them almost like in a laboratory setting. We're going to have a dozen people over at this table, and for the next 6 months, you're going to meditate for 4 hours a day in this particular fashion. You are going to be taking a look at only the New Testament in these 4 chapters, all kinds of different stuff, to see if there was anything that actually accelerated people so that they could have this change of consciousness, this change that you are heir to. This is this is Alcoholics Anonymous. You ever sat in one of those meetings and they go, "Well, I don't meditate because I'm not good at it." Oh, I wasn't good at not drinking either. But that we are making an incredible contribution to the change of consciousness of the planet every time that we are involved in this. And we get to do it in a way that not only is it transferable and transmittable, but every time that we sit across the table from somebody reading the book or doing work, and we see the eyes light up, we get to tap into that in a way that very, very few people ever have the privilege of doing. And we get to do it for fun and for free. Stunning. So Herd is out there in Trabuco Canyon. Wilson comes by because Exman has told him, "You're making a swing through California. You need to stop and see Gerald Herd." Well, at the time, Wilson's going through all this stuff about the traditions. And he's trying to figure out what's the structure going to be. And Herd says to him, "Small autonomous groups, no central authority." From his anthropological take, this was the next evolutionary step that mass movements could make. And they became really close friends and did all kinds of wonderful things together. After 5 years, the center was not self-supporting, and so Herd donated to the Vedanta Society, which is the oldest Hindu sect of Los Angeles, and you can still go there today, and you can go and meditate. And they have a Thursday evening meeting that you can go to at the Trabuco College campus. In 1954, 53 and 54, there's a place called the Wainwright House in New York, and Exman had gotten together with Dr. Leslie Weatherhead, who was a noted theologian and preacher, and he and his group they put together a think tank. And their idea was to develop a prayer service of healing that could be injected into the traditional congregational churches in the United States and hopefully foment a movement of real spirit infusing the traditional church structure. The people that were there were people like Eileen Garrett from the Parapsychology Foundation, Carlton Sherwood from from Duke University, who worked with J.B. Ryan, who is the man who developed the whole thing about ESP. There were a bunch of different theologians. Huxley was there, Hurd was there, Exman was there, Rachel Davis Dubois was there, the woman who started intercultural education, statistically analyzing it, proving that if you put white and black kids in the same room, they wouldn't kill each other and all that stuff. And on the Saturday night, the prime person that they're going to use as the closing speaker for the thing is William Griffith Wilson, because he knew that his experience at Towns was a gift, was an intervention from the power. And he never believed that he was responsible for that, even though we keep waving this book and acting like he somehow came down and transmitted all this stuff for us to follow and all that. That's not what happened. He always believed that this was something outside of him. This group that he was involved with at Wainwright, this spiritual healing seminar, this guy has found his tribe. They're looking at his experience not as something remarkable, but something that how can we take this, how can we make this available to all? So they're working on this stuff. Brilliant people, and I get to read the transcripts from the weekend and all that stuff. And a year later, there's a new psychological medicine, because one of the things that they're talking about in this is where's the real trouble? It's centered in the mind of the human being, the modern human being. Frank Bookman, the initiator of the Oxford group, said that the Antichrist is materialism. From materialism comes classism, and it's what separates people. It's where racism comes from. It all comes back to this trying to materially make sense of the world. So Wilson is engaged with this group of people in this new it was called psychochemotherapy. And the medication was lysergic acid dilithiumide. Yeah. Now, I know this is really hard to sell to people that were born in the 40s and 50s and 60s. But the reality is that when I say LSD, you don't have any idea what I'm talking about. You don't have a clue. Because it's been framed for you by fear and by people that don't know what the experience is. There was over 100 million hits of LSD produced between Sandoz quit manufacturing in 1964. Between 1968 and 1972, there was over 100 million hits that were distributed, right? And but what happened is that I like to say that there's two different experiences, and some of the older folks here were inculcated into a spiritual thing that I like to call the psychedelic experience, and then which was about there were things you had to read, there were things you had to listen to, there were settings that you were supposed to be in when you had your initial experience. I mean, if you didn't, you wouldn't get the results. And then there's the hallucinogenic experience, like, oh wow, man, did you see? You know, don't you love tile ceiling? You know, I mean, this guy keeps talking, and I can just count the dots. Anyhow, So Professor Hurd is working with Stanley Cohen, who is the preeminent researcher on psychedelics on the West Coast. They're working, trying different stuff. Who does Hurd turn to him? Turns to his colleague, Bill Wilson, and said, you need to come and try this, because one of the things we want to see is this experience anything like the experience that you had? Is this going to be the way that we can make this experience transmittable and available to people? So Wilson comes out to Santa Monica, and he has the experience. And Professor Hurd's there taking notes, and Dr. Cohen's there, and Tom Powers is there, and Bill has what's very interesting about Bill's talks. What he got from that experience was confirmation of his initial experience. He got confirmation of the reality of it. And if you listen to his talks prior to 1956, he will always throw a little, he loved to throw a little side thing about, my hot flash. Just to say, that it was, he didn't know by 1956, it's been 20 years. 20 plus years since the experience in town. What had happened is it had become a memory that he had to conjure up instead of a reality that he to be aware of. And what the experience did with the LSD was it woke, it was like, oh, it's real. And he never, again, qualifies. He never calls it the hot flash anymore. He changes it, he calls it my flash of reality. So he has this experience. Hurd and Dr. Cohen are working on the West Coast. There's Eugene Exman and David and Lucille Kahn, and some folks on the East that want to get engaged in this stuff, but there's just nothing. They can't handle the demand of folks that want to do this. And Hurd's deal was they were going to give it to, artists, politicians, theologians, philosophers to try, to see, is there a through line to this experience? Bill goes back to New York, and Dr. Hurd and Dr. Cohen say, we need some help. We need to set up a test group to really do this. And so for the next year and change, Tom Powers, Helen Wynn, did the real putting together of this thing that they called the basic group. And it was a group of incredible intellectuals on the East Coast that got together. They came up with a methodology by which, like Debbie was going to come over, and we were going to, and so what we would do is we'd interview her beforehand. We'd ask her about her relationship with, does she have a relationship with God? What's her prayer life like? Blah, 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 blah. Do a little psychological profile. Then they would have the experience in what was very, very vital. It's called set and setting. That without the proper set and setting, in other words, the set being the methodology that we're going to use to administer this medicine, and how it is that we're going to do this with certain music and having people witness it and being there. There was always medical supervision. Dr. Robert Laidlaw, that was the head of the chief psychiatrist at Rockefeller Hospital, supervised all this stuff. And there was a 14-week period in 1958 where I've been privileged to listen to the tapes. There is nothing so boring as listening to somebody's LSD journey. It's just, it's interior. But I've listened to the tapes, and then they also had transcripts of the different interviews that they had before, during, and then afterwards. And it's remarkable stuff. So when you hear somebody say, "Oh, Bill dropped acid to find out," to improve his spiritual contact, au contraire. This is not what these people were doing. Did they take the medicine? Absolutely. But there was a focus, there was a method, and this method that they put together, up until 1964, anybody that was doing responsible psychedelic research at some point generally reached out to Bill Wilson to ask about what it was that they were doing, what the results were, and all that stuff. So when we talk about this psychochemotherapy, we're not talking about in a dark closet is a place to trip. Lee Michaels references work. But that we are talking about a group of people that were trying to accelerate the expansion of consciousness of the race. Now, a couple things happened. One of the reasons I'm one of the most fortunate people you've ever met is one of my mentors is Dr. Sandy Unger. Sandy Unger is the man who wrote the initial thing about psychedelics and personality change, and worked for the National Institute of Mental Health, and was very, very close with Tim Leary. And at one point, Unger says to Tim, he says, "Tim, you got to slow down on this. This thing about getting it out to everybody and all that stuff. We need to do the responsible research. We need to." And Leary, being the good Irishman that he was, said, "If we let the squares keep it, there will never be any structural change." And there's lots of wonderful correspondence with Wilson and all these different responsible researchers and think tanks and the like, and he's also mystified because he knows from his experience that there's nothing to be afraid about with this medication. Yeah, there are some people that have a difficult reaction to it, but as he said, most of those people were very deeply troubled beforehand, and it did not have the set and setting. So, little thing on. So LSD becomes, this cultural phenomenon, and there's all this stuff that's going on, and Wilson can't be involved with it, and there's all kinds of great stuff coming from California, where Wynn Laws is writing to Sam Shoemaker anyway, she's writing to Shoemaker saying, you got to stop Bill. He's doing this stuff. He's gone off the rail. He's taken a pill and he's seen God, and now it's going to destroy Alcoholics Anonymous. And she writes him and says, you were given this gift and you're violating it and all this stuff. It's one of the things that Wilson got from his Jungian analysis was that he said, there is nothing so noble as to live your life for other people. But there's nothing as impossible as trying to live your life as other people want you to live it. And in 1955, when he finally was able to, at least organizationally, drop the fellowship, he started to be able to have the life that he wanted to have. In whatever way that he could, because by this time, by 1958, he and Lois were basically housebound. Any place that he goes, he's recognized, and people want him to do stuff and all that stuff. So another person so Bill's very close with Aldous Huxley. Huxley said that Bill was, he called Bill a modern saint, and his widow Laura wrote Bill the most beautiful letter when Aldous died, talking about how much Bill meant to him. The person who administered the first psychedelic to Huxley is a guy by the name of Dr. Humphrey Osmond, who was from Weyburn Hospital up in Regina, Saskatchewan. Saskatchewan. Yeah, thank you. I need a drink after that. Osmond and his colleague Abram Hoffer, these two incredible people, were literally trying to find the cure for schizophrenia. And they did all kinds of amazing work at the hospital in Regina, Saskatchewan. They also found that LSD helped the staff understand the challenges that the patients were going through. And so Osmond and Hoffer insisted that if you're going to work with us, you got to do this. And they also were, there's a book called A New Hope for Alcoholics, where they also were working, because a lot of the street drunks, it's kind of a double blind with schizophrenia. And because a lot of schizophrenics mask their symptoms with alcohol. And, but anyway, so there are these two brilliant people, and Wilson gets in contact with Dr. Osmond, and they start talking. And then in 1958, he and his colleague Abram Hoffer come to a conference that was being put on at the Barbizon Plaza Hotel about psychedelics and parapsychology, and about how it's people that had had a psychedelic experience had their mediumship improved, or their ability to do precognition tests and things like that. And so Wilson's invited to go and give this talk about it because of the work that they'd been doing just that fall, and give a report. The Parapsychology Foundation also funded a lot of the work that the Basic Group was doing. And he's sitting there, and he's drinking coffee, and he's smoking cigarettes, and he's just restless. And Dr. Osmond says, we've been working on something, it's called leucoadrenochrome, and it's a natural substance, and it works on the adrenals. Now, we know now that, trauma and alcoholism are, talk about concurrent disorders, Well, why are they talking about trauma in the meetings? Well, it's a new language. We used to just say, it's kind of stressful waking up with somebody you don't know. Now it's called trauma. It's okay. I mean, can you imagine waking up with me? Traumatic. But anyway, so they're and so they give this to Bill, and he takes it, and he calms down. And he'd never been calm this way without a drink before. It was amazing. And Wilson was very aware that the problem in Alcoholics Anonymous with all the people that were taking sedatives, and the psychotropic drugs in those days weren't very sophisticated. So anyway, he gets all excited about this. Now, people used Wilson's work with Hoffer as the thing of build the promoter, the power driver, finding another niche. No. When Bill's talking about being a power driver, he's talking about the first 5 years up until the publication of the book. That's when he's talking about being a power driver. And one of the things he always said is, I wonder if I would have presented myself differently if Hank or Ebby would have stayed sober. That's the power driving phase. Okay. This is an incredibly intelligent man with a remarkable array of friends and contacts in business all over the world, from his Wall Street days and from his days in Alcoholics Anonymous. And so they start passing different samples around, and Marty Mann tries it, and a bunch of the people at the office, and Helen tries it, and they're getting results. And so he actually got Pfizer to launch this product. I mean, to bring a medication to market is an incredible enterprise, and he was right front center and in the middle of it, while still being of service to us. And but the thing was, it was a natural substance, and they couldn't get it shelf stable, and so it didn't work. It wasn't able to work. Then Dr. Hoffer, and we all owe Dr. Abram Hoffer a great thanks. He was running apartment with a psychiatrist by the name of Frank, and they were talking about Mildred, and he said, "This woman's not crazy. She's alcoholic." So Dr. Abram Hoffer always has a special place in my heart because he identified my friend. He diagnosed her. And anyway, he found that with schizophrenics and with alcoholics, because that was the test population at the Weyburn Hospital, that using 1,000 milligrams of vitamin B3, niacin, and vitamin C 3 times a day fundamentally changed these people. That a large group of them had a very, very positive response. And they start going through this, and Bill, of course, is in the middle of all of it, finds out about it, and he starts doing what Bill does, was let his friends know and then let it go. And so again, this is Wilson's the evolution of his life. He goes into medications. There's lysergic acid, problems. Then to Leuco, finally gets to a natural substance, and then to niacin. And they have this incredible response and everything to it. So this is who this guy was. He's not just, sitting around helping alcoholics. What he wants to do is use his gifts for the planet, for everyone. And it was not ego-driven. It was in response to the life that was evolving in front of him, just like the life that's evolving in front of every one of us. Now, Bill was always a great seeker. I'm just about out of time here, so I'm just going to talk about a couple of books, and then tell you a story that I enjoy inflicting on people. So, Bill was not a big reader. Spiritual truth that never conflicts. So you can get any enthusiasm that's spiritually true, and you can lay it on top of Alcoholics Anonymous, and it matches. You can crack open the Holy Quran, and it sinks. You can look at the Bible. But they were not sitting here with all these books going around and around and around. But there are a couple of books that he recommended. Number one was Varieties. Now, if you're going to read Varieties, remember that it's lectures. It's not a book. Number two, that if you're going to read the book, read it the way Wilson did, which is Ebby brought him the book, start at chapter 9, lecture 9, conversion. Because in that book in that lecture is the story of S.H. Hadley from down on Water Street, and it's the story of a drunk's white light conversion. This guy Hadley, his son actually ran the Calvary mission. He just died 18 months before Ebby was there. But so this Hadley story was part of the consciousness of not only the Oxford group, but this Oxford group mission that Ebby was at. And so when he comes back and says, my pigeon's all lit up, they go, oh, here, he's worried he's crazy. Here, have him read this. It's exactly the same story. Exactly the same story. Except that he asked for Jesus for help. And so there's that. Start at lecture 9. And then you go from there, and it's a lot of personal stories and the like. But I don't even know that Wilson actually read that much of it. But he got the I'm not crazy part. The second book is Cosmic Consciousness by Bucky, B-U-C-K-E. And it's an analysis of spiritual experiences up until 1900. All the people that they could find. Third book is a book called The Imprisoned Splendor by Raynor Johnson. Like Varieties, this is a book about mysticism. We didn't get very deep into that. We'll do that another time. The first section is the current science, so just skip it. Go to the second section. And the second and third section, Raynor Johnson, R-A-Y-N-O-R. And the fourth is Heaven and Hell by Aldous Huxley. Those are the 4 books that I saw him, I've seen him recommend other people. There's nothing else. There's nothing else that I've been able to find. And I've probably read 3,000 of his letters by now. So those are really wonderful things. The Imprisoned Splendor, he says, because most people that were writing to Bill were suffering in one way or another. Help me, please. And so this was a book that he said, look, this volume has more information in it than anything else that I know of, and it's been of great help to me. So, but again, the other part of my prejudice as a historian, the reason I'm giving this talk, is that I want to inspire you to seek now, tomorrow, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 15 years from now. Why? Because that's what my guy Bill was doing. So there was an AA meeting at the house. It's 1969. Okay, so Sgt. Pepper's been out for about 18 months. Okay. Everybody started going to Rishikesh to visit the Maharishi. Now, Bill was all over all different kinds of spiritual practices over the years. And, so a guy got sober in Bedford Hills, and his son had just come back from India, and he couldn't believe the difference in his son. And his son had started teaching transcendental meditation. He had spent time with the Maharishi. And so this guy says, would you like to learn? And Bill and Helen jump on it. And so this guy, his name's Lincoln Norton, and I'm having lunch with him next Saturday. He was 19 at the time. And so he goes and he goes to the meeting, and there's Bill and Helen's son Shep, and a fourth person, and he gives the primary lecture, which in transcendental meditation, what happens is you get 4 different lectures, 4 days in a row, and then you're walked through and given your mantra, and then you apply it those 4 days to make sure you got it synced and it's right and it's part of you. So, Lincoln gives the talk, and then he and Bill go upstairs to the bedroom. Now, Bill is really, really sick with emphysema. We're talking, you know, he's maybe got 13 years to live. He's drowning a lot of the time. And Lincoln makes a little puja and sits there at the side of the bed and whispers the mantra to Bill, and then he, you know, leaves, and so Bill can have his first experience. After 20 minutes, he walks upstairs to check on his guy, see how his first experience was. The bed's empty. He's gone. Lincoln runs downstairs. He says, "Hey, anybody see where Bill went?" No. And all of a sudden, a couple minutes later, through the door, he bursts. And he goes, "This stuff really works." And what had happened is that in the meditative state, his lungs relaxed, and he was able to breathe in a way that he hadn't been able to, and he snuck outside to be able to have some of the night air. So he comes in, and Helen had got it in hers, and this other guy got in his, and so for the next 4 days they go through the experience. After the 4th time, Bill says to Lincoln, "Now I understand the 11th step." Now, how many of us have had that response to learning a new meditative practice? You know, I mean, you get stretched in other areas. And Lincoln looks at him, he says, "How can you say that?" He said, "You wrote the thing." And what Bill said to him was, it was like a flash in a dream. He said it was not something it was not something cognitive. So, you know, we know that Bill at least learned it. We know now because of Lincoln, Lincoln's father was a member of the fellowship, and Lincoln's father and Helen Wynne meditated together for years afterwards. So I'm all excited, right? I found this new neat story. So I'm talking to my teacher, my meditation teacher, and he says, "Oh, I meditated with Bill W." What? And he said, "Yeah." He said, "I was down in Florida. I was at my folks' house. I was teaching TM to colonels and generals in the first strike response Air Force folks. Again, 1969, things are a little hairy." And he says, "I got a call from Jerry Jarvis, who's the head of TM in the United States, real close to the Maharishi. And he said, we've got a friend that's in Miami that's really in trouble. And he wants to meditate. We want you to go down and see him. And this is what the Maharishi has said you're to do. You're to go and in TM, their deal is, you know, it's 20 minutes twice a day, no mas, unless you're supervised with a lot of, you know, a lot of care around you. He said, tell Wilson that he's to meditate an hour a day, twice a day. Because what we want to do is we want to introduce the self, capital S, which is the ultimate healer, or if it be nature's will, it will allow the transition to be easier. And so he went and he did that once, and Helen was there, and then there was another, after the convention when they rushed him to the hospital, he came down 3-4 days later and had one last sitting with Wilson. So the fun thing is, guy's in a jam, what's he doing? He's finding a spiritual solution to go with all the other medical stuff that he was doing. But he was always getting information, he was always trying stuff. So If there's anything that I can tell you from my relationship with Bill Wilson, and I am very, very humbled by the relationship that I have, dream deeply. Follow your heart. And keep your hands and your mind open. Thank you.
Wow, there was just a lot of information in Jay's share that many of us may have had no clue of. Well, now you're more informed, right? I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Take 12 Recovery Radio Show as we featured yet another 12-step circuit speaker. Listen, if you'd like to listen to more 12-step recovery speakers and download them for fun and for free, please visit our website at take12radio.com and click on the link, 12-Step Recovery Speakers. Until our next broadcast, this is the Monty'man, and as always, I am wishing God's perfect serenity for you.
This has been a broadcast of KHLT Recovery Broadcasting.
This has been a Chicken and a Pig production.